Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. Today we're going to talk about medicine and Spiritism. Why not? We are talking about the results of a great discussion that was promoted in London, organized by the British Union of the Spiritist Societies and also the International Medical Spiritist Association. It was the third British Medical Spiritist meeting. It's all about bridging medicine and spirituality. And it was a great event, an event that not only promoted great discussion, brought new findings, but we could feel heart and reasoning together. It was truly touching. The conversations between scientists from Spiritism to medicine was touching, and we want to share this with you. And if you may be asking, is it really Spiritism when we talk about medicine and spirituality? Well, let's bring Kardec here and answer to this question. Allan Kardec, in the book Genesis, chapter 1, item 16, he talks about the following. In the same way that science per se has its object, the study of the laws of the material principle, the special object of Spiritism is the knowledge of the laws of the spiritual principle. Now, since the latter is one of the forces of nature which reacts incessantly and reciprocally upon the material principle, it follows that knowledge of one cannot be complete without knowledge of the other. Spiritism and science complete each other. Science without Spiritism is completely unable to explain certain phenomena solely by means of the laws of matter. Spiritism without science would lack support and control. The study of the laws of matter had to precede the study of spirituality because it is matter that first strikes the senses. If Spiritism had come before scientific discoveries, it would have been aborted endeavor like everything else that arrives before its time. Here we are, dear listener, with Kardec's own words about the importance of bridging Spiritism and science. Spiritism is a science in itself, and science in the material realm also deserves our attention, because as you see throughout the conversations that we have here, the meeting that we had actually brought to us the understanding that life is more than our eyes can see. So we're going to begin our show today with prayer by Emmanuel, and then after the first break, we're going to bring to you a conversation with all the speakers in this meeting and excerpts of their talks that are quite fascinating. Listen to this amazing prayer by Emmanuel, and we'll come back after the break.
Only today. Throughout your whole life, you will never have another day like today. Remember this, and attend to all good that you can do. Be useful by helping someone. Pay heed to your duties. Happiness and peace, hope and care are what you wish to sow in your path. Joy and favor are gifts that you wish to offer. Relationships that you need to mend, courtesy at home, the most simple and the most demanding work, review, readjustment, corrections, forgiveness, signs of care and esteem, spiritual support during the work that you embrace and bless. Not one of these things should you delay or leave for later, because time will not return. In a day like today, you only have once.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
On December 6th, Strand Releasing proudly releases on DVD the Brazilian blockbuster Astro City, A Spiritual Journey. Based on the best-selling book by medium Chico Xavier, the film tells the story of André Luiz, a successful doctor who experiences an enlightening spiritual awakening after his death. When he wakes up in the spiritual world, he embarks on a new journey of self-discovery and transformation. From his first days in a dimension of pain and suffering until when he's rescued and taken to the spiritual astral city. With magnificent art direction and special effects that have never been seen before in a Brazilian production, and feature an amazing score by composer Philip Glass, the film brings to the screen what life is like at the astral city that hovers in the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere. Buy your copy now. Contact us at www.strandreleasing.com.
The newest edition of the Medium's book by Allan Kardec is now available. Purchase your copy online or via your ebook reader. Simply go to www.ediciofamerica.com today.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live. Evolution in Two Worlds. A journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, André Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Enrich your spiritual senses and deepen your foundations of Spiritism with the book, What is Spiritism? By Allan Kardec. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediciofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
The Third British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality happened on the 5th and the 6th of November 2011 in London, United Kingdom, and the speakers were Dr. Merlene Nobre, when she talked about Will Science Ever Embrace the Power of Love, Dr. Andrew Powell, and he gave a lecture on listening to the heart, Dr. Peter Fenwick about dropping subject and object consciousness and moving to the divine. Dr. Alexander Moreira gave 2 talks in regard to the implications of mediumistic experiences for the mind and brain relationship. Dr. Giancarlo Lucchetti about Spiritist hospitals in Brazil, conventional psychiatric and spiritual therapy. Dr. Mario Perez on spirituality in clinical practice. Dr. Decio Iandoli about the basis of the transdimensional physiology, Dr. Juan Ascenso on the role of self-transcendence in more evolution and its relation to the parietal cortex, Dr. Ivenia Prada on the integration of mind, body, brain, and cytoplasm, and Dr. Vanessa Anceloni on the neuroscience of emotions and healing. If you want more information about this meeting, you can go online at www.medspiritcongress.org, and also information will be available to you through the British Union of Spiritist Societies.
These are now the interviews and the excerpt of the talks from the speakers of the 3rd Medical Spiritist meeting in London this year. Listen to this, enjoy, and rejoice.
We're here with Dr. Andrew Powell, and we had the honor to listen to one of his talks on open heart, open mind, and it was so inspirational. So Dr. Powell, thank you for being with us at Kardec Radio. What can a physician or a health provider do to, in brief minutes, assess the patient beyond the words and make a connection that builds that bond of trust between patient and physician?
Well, thank you. Often the physician doesn't have much time. It's a matter of a few minutes maybe. But luckily, the connection can be made in seconds. It doesn't even take minutes. And really what it requires is an open heart. We're very well trained in the discipline of mentalizing, conceptualizing, formulating, problem solving, and that's all very necessary in the science of medicine. But the art of medicine is to meet that person who's seeking help in such a way that your heart is open and their heart is enabled to be open, especially at a time of anxiety, stress, and often fear when someone isn't well. So that's something that is done not by a lot of discussion, but by the way that you meet the person, the vibration that you bring, the openness with which you receive them in whatever state of feeling they're in. And when that connection is made, it's a heart-to-heart connection. Actually, it's a soul-to-soul connection, and it just takes a few seconds.
I would dare to ask this question. Maybe it's going to take us a whole show to discuss this deeply, but how would we train our students to open their hearts?
Yeah, that would take a long time to really discuss. I think the first thing is by setting an example. This isn't something you tell somebody to do, you try to show them. We know medical students are very impressed by the way that their consultants and other senior colleagues behave. Often they actually end up imitating their behavior and way of speaking and bedside manner. So it's really important that we bring to them that openness and also respect for our patients, that we're very privileged to receive often very confidential and personal information, and not to get too caught up in the complexity of the disease as a thing in itself. Remember that it's a person who is experiencing the problem, and that person is central. So it's person to person, and it's soul to soul. In fact, when you talk with people trying for places at medical school, young new medical students, they have this quality of openness. The sad thing is that often after a few years, they've become hardened, defensive, and some of that is understandable in relation to a sort of response to the very painful and traumatic things that they see, but some of it is because they adopt the prevailing stance, a rather defensive stance, a rather impersonal stance that is somehow built into the practice of a lot of medicine. So my answer would be, make that connection with medical students at the start and hang on to them all the way through their training, because they come into medicine with a deep sense of vocation, they are open-hearted, and that can be sustained while they do all the necessary other training that is required of a doctor.
Here we go. Dr. Powell, please come back to Kardec Radio. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Franziska Kranz from Kardec Radio, and we are here live on the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. What's your name, please?
Rebecca Green.
Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. So what is your impression of the Congress so far?
It's very thought-provoking, very intelligent minds with a lot of heart as well. It's been an absolute joy to be exposed to all the people that I've met here today and to listen to the speakers.
And what is the thing you liked most? Is there something you take home which really especially touched you, or something to inspire you for the daily life or something?
That it's okay not to know, that there's a lot out there in the world that we really don't know, that we don't have to explain everything, that there's another kind of knowingness that comes from another part of a human being that isn't necessarily of your intellectual mind.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
I'm Luis Grasso from Kardec Radio. We are here at the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. Would you like to say what's your name, what you do, and what you have been, your impressions on what is happening today?
Yes. My name is George Stephen. I'm very happy to be here. The main item of interest for me is definitely reincarnation and the Spiritist belief that we are actually spirits coming down to do a learning process and gradually, hopefully, improving. There's also an interesting amount of information about Spiritist medicine in Brazil, which is of great interest. So I'm glad to have been here on both days.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for participating in our program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nobre, for being here with us at Kardec Radio. We'd like to know if you could summarize the main points of your opening lecture on the 3rd British Medical Spiritist Congress in London.
Com muito prazer.
My pleasure. We bring scientific findings that shake the grounds of the materialistic paradigm of neuroscience. These are facts, research, important facts. They come to show to us that the concept of our consciousness, of ourselves, of our deep consciousness, is not restricted to the materialistic concept that reduces everything to the brain. In the materialistic view, it is said that a few neurons or a pathway in the brain is responsible for the individual's consciousness, which means that everything comes from the physical brain. Thus, we brought here scientific findings from, for example, deathbed patients who had clairvoyant experiences reported by William Fletcher Barrett in the United Kingdom, a renowned physicist from the Royal College. In 1926, he published a study done with physicians and nurses about what patients have said in their last minutes of life at the threshold of death. When Fletcher published this work, it caused a cascade of other researches. Once Owens in the United States also published similar work, though more amplified. Owens not only worked with the country population, but also with a transcultural approach in a research between American and Indian cultures. The questionnaires were distributed both to physicians and nurses who recorded what patients used to say at the last moments of terrestrial life. They reported their conversations, what they saw, etc. And both Barrett as well as Owens verified that patients reported seeing deceased beings who used to come to pick them up. They also mentioned saints, evolved spirits, whom they saw at deathbed, as described to the nurses and physicians. These were important scientific evidences because the reports indicate that these deathbed visions are 3 times higher than the ones reported by ordinary people. Well, it is important to report this fact on the clairvoyance of these spirits because it happens when one is crossing over, indicating the transcendence of consciousness. For example, as reported by Dr. Barrett, in the case of a woman who had labor and was dying, she said to see her sister and her father who came to pick her up. 15 days earlier, her sister was alive, and she did not know that her sister was already dead. Cases such as this were reported in all the research publications. Then, next in our talk, we mentioned the out-of-body experiences in which the patient talks about and describes things without being able to see things through the physical body once the brain is considered clinically dead. Then, we analyze cases of near-death experiences, NDE. We mentioned the main researchers in the field and the impacting research of Dr. Pimbanum, published in The Lancet, the most important journal of science in the world, in which he published 8 years of research on NDEs. We mentioned cases of his, such as the one by Dr. Elizabeth Kluber-Ross, as well as the ones by Dr. Noble, showing that patients used to see things during the time in which they were considered clinically dead. And the materialistic science tries to explain these cases, but is actually unable to do so. It doesn't have a solid context in its explanation. We also mentioned in our talk the research done on the letters received by Chico Xavier. There were 160 questionnaires. The reported cases were such that their information were impossible to be assessed by an extrasensorial perception because the parents themselves had no idea about the facts being described by their children in the letters. So the main question in my talk was, where is consciousness? Is it a material consciousness Or is it a consciousness much more profound that results from an extra-physical structure? Because its concept is more ample than a physical body can offer. I then develop answers to this question until we reach great concepts by great scientists of our time, such as the mathematician Roger Penrose Hameroff, a physicist who created a theory to explain thought, and they conclude that the structure of the mind cannot be material. They started this reflection with the theorem of Gaudet, in which it considers that if the brain is a microcomputer, how can it create meaning? The brain actually only uses the material that is in him deposited. Thus, Dr. Penrose develops this theory about the thought based on the microtubules, the tubulins. Then we talk about the theory of Harry Stack, which is simply formidable and matches perfectly what André Luiz brought to us once he explains it all through quantum physics. Let us open a parenthesis here. The spirit cannot express itself through classical physics. It must express itself through the principles of quantum physics, in which the particles are infinitely small, those produced by the spirit, through thought, which are mental atoms, according to André Luiz. These atoms are incredibly small, consisting of high energies, thus only the laws of quantum physics could explain them. And Dr. Harry Stack has a theory that is very important for us, because it coincides with what was brought by André Luiz, as much as the findings by Dr. Maurice Beauregard from Canada, who wrote The Spiritual Brain. He reports the spiritual experiences detached from the physical body. Consciousness is expansive by nature, once it is of spiritual nature. At the end of my talk, I talked about André Luiz, and I mentioned that we adopt the transcendental view, which coincides with the most current research, opposite to the materialistic and reductionist view. I am grateful to everyone here, and especially to Chico Xavier, who brought to us this information to face the brutal materialism. As we know, Spiritism has come to confront materialism, to combat materialism, and this is what we have been doing through the works of the Medical Spiritist Association.
I'm Luis Grasso from Kardec Radio. I'm here directly from the 3rd British Congress of Medicine and Spirituality. Would you like, please, to say what's your name and then what impressions you're having about this Congress?
My name's Dr. Peter Fennick. I am a neuropsychiatrist, so I deal with brains and I deal with minds. And so, of course, consciousness is one of the areas that I'm enormously interested in. The conference is quite amazing. You would certainly find difficulty in going to a congress like this anywhere else because a lot of the ideas are not mainstream. And if they're not mainstream, then it's very difficult to get money to support them and to publicize them. But what we've heard this morning are 3 simply wonderful talks. The first one was about the non-locality of mind. And the second one was a theoretical and speculative paper about the connection between a transcendental reality and the brain and the body. And then the last one was about the caring that can be done in psychiatric practice to use spiritual values. And so it's been really outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Franziska Kranz from Kardec Radio. We're here live from the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. What's your name, please?
It's Dina O'Brien.
Hello, thanks for joining us. So what is your impression about the Congress?
I think it's really, really interesting. And I think the people are running it are very kind and very warm and generous. But I think the speakers are amazing. I love the scientific aspect. And it's really interesting to see how we can look at this idea of what is consciousness and what is spirituality and how they work together.
Okay, and what impressed you the most? Is there something that stands out?
That's a very good question. I've just done a master's in transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies at Northampton University, and this is echoing a lot of the stuff that I've done with the quantum physics. But I find it very interesting to see that in Brazil there's so much of an interest going on with this, and how the Spiritist movement is trying to take forward the more scientific understanding, rather than just saying, oh, this is what we do, but to try to understand. And the talk this morning about the issues with psychopathology and the difficulties of schizophrenic, and it's the interesting of how so often people aren't actually having a mental health problem. They're simply having an experience that they don't understand, and it doesn't necessarily fit into their culture. So I think it's really, really interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We are here with Dr. Décio Iandoli from Brazil, and he is one of the members of the Medical Spiritist Associations in Brazil. And he's here giving lecture at the third British Medical Spiritist meeting in London. Dr. Iandoli, thank you so much for being here at Kardec Radio. I would like to ask you if you could give us the main highlights of your talk at the meeting.
The discussion is about the transdimensional being. It's about the new paradigm, which is not only considered matter, but matter and spirit. So we see the human being as a transdimensional being, someone who inhabits more than one dimension simultaneously. The first aspect to be discussed is if there is a model, a hypothesis, or a possibility that can explain this transdimensionality. And the model we used is the one used by Tyler and Einstein, the one on negative space and time. This model is cited on a book named Transdimensional Medicine by Richard Gerber, and we adapted this model to the Spiritist thought. The greatest theoretical obstacle of this model is that it demanded that the particles of matter traveled above the light speed, and recently in CERN, France, these particles were identified. So this is a very consistent model that explains the transdimensionality. Thus, the next step is to identify the biological mechanism that connects this non-physical dimension to the physical dimension of the being. So we are working on building what we call the interface physical ethereal, which means to identify the elements of this interface and how they work. Some authors brought hypotheses in this regard. These studies involved basically quantum physics, based mostly on information brought to us by the spirit André Luiz in the book Evolution in Two Worlds. We are able to foresee everything that is about to be discovered and studied by medicine. The greatest news between 2002 and 2004 to the present is the issue on the microtubules in the cytoplasm of the cell as the amplifier of the quantum signal. And André Luiz mentioned in the book Evolution in Two Worlds that through these microtubules, the soul communicates with the cell, sending information to the cell. Once again, the masterpiece of André Luiz and his truly visionary works are being confirmed by science each day.
We are here at the third British Medical Spiritist meeting about medicine and spirituality, and we have the honor to talk to us Dr. João Nascenso from Brazil. He's going to give a talk, and we would like him to give us a brief overview about the lines of research on spirituality. As we are talking so much about spirituality and medicine, what are the main lines of research on spirituality, Dr. Nascenso?
Well, we try to create a system in order for people to understand better these main lines. And the first one we find very interesting and promising is the mind-body relationship, especially concerning out-of-the-body experience and near-death experiences, which has lots of eminent researchers nowadays. For example, Dr. Peter Fenwick in UK and Dr. Bruce Grace in the University of Virginia and many others. It's already been studied in UCL in London and University of Cambridge and Oxford. The second one is the scientific study of mediumship, which has not been properly studied until nowadays. There are some initial researchers that's just trying to systematize the phenomena of mediumship, not only in Brazil, but also by Dr. Gary Schwartz in the University of Arizona. The third one is already known by Americans, which is the cage's suggestive reincarnation. And we point out the importance of birthmarks, the work performed by Dr. Ian Stevenson and his followers, who continue this work in the University of Virginia. The fourth is very important. It was the pioneer Harold Koenig in Duke University, which is spirituality and health. So the effects of spirituality and religiosity in health, in all its aspects, in all areas of the body. For example, headaches and many other health studies that he performed. It's already being replicated in Brazil very successfully with international publications by Giancarlo Lucchetti in São Paulo. The fifth is the scientific study of healing. There is a very big project led by Dr. Gary Schwartz in the University of Arizona, and some studies that are being performed also in São Paulo. The sixth one is not in spirituality, not concerns spirits, but also a very important area that we consider is that the recovery of moral psychology studied by neuroscience, which is called a very new area of research, which is called moral cognitive neuroscience, which concerns values, moral emotions, moral sentiments, and moral motivations, which is being recovered by old traditions of Lawrence Kohlberg from Harvard University. And the seventh, other concepts connected with spirituality, such as mindfulness meditation, which has very interesting publications nowadays in neuroscience, also self-transcendence, and so on. So we think these 7 lines of research are very promising in the next 30 years, for example, and they study the very broad dimensions of spirituality. One of the main challenges of spirituality is to try to find specific concepts that can be discriminated from other concepts and discriminated from religious organized traditions, which is important from a scientific point of view. And as far as they study, for example, out-of-the-body experience, which is being now published, the varieties of anomalous experience, which has been published by American Psychological Association, which is very strict in scientific and experiments, which is very important for science.
Now listen to excerpts of the talk of this speaker and enjoy it.
What I'm going to talk about today is the role of self-transcendence in human evolution and its relation to the parietal cortex. One important component of spirituality is the ability to project the self into mental dimensions and that transcend perceptual and motor bodily contingencies. And this ability is called self-transcendence. The reduction of neuroactivity in the temporal parietal cortex during spiritual experiences may reflect an altered sense of one's body in space. The contribution of this study is that we could find a causative relationship between self-transcendence and a specific brain region, namely temporal parietal regions. A specific psychiatric state such as TCI, especially self-transcendence scale, was partly neurobiologically validated as far as self-transcendence is concerned. Specific brain regions damaged like temporal parietal cortex and the absence of relationship between anterior cortex regions and self-transcendence, at least in this study. There are other studies that show a relationship between self-transcendence and the frontal areas, although they are not very specific and very well defined and conclusive. But they didn't find it in this study. And raises another question is that in 1947, in the book called, I think it's in English called In the Greater Word, isn't it, Vanessa? Yeah? In the Greater Word, Calderaro, which was a spiritual instructor of André Luiz, he explained a model of moral evolution and their relationship with the brain. I don't have time to explain the whole model for you here, but in the motor cortex, for example, he explains, then in the region of the motor cortex, which is the intermediary area between the frontal lobes and the nerves, lies a developed brain, consolidating the motor powers of our minds that our mind uses for the essential manifestations in the current evolutionary instant of our way of being. And he says, whoever lives in the present without deep reflection, without requiring from the accomplishments of the past, and trying to transcend the self into the future, lives a mechanical existence without the light of wisdom. So one of the things that Calderaro mentioned is that if we only leave the perceptions that we see outside in everyday life, like Dr. Fenwick mentioned, is our day-to-day register of the brain. If we don't try to transcend our lives to another realities, another way of thinking way of transcend ourselves to beyond, we live in a very mechanical existence. And what we find very tricky is the trend for neurodegenerative diseases for the future, which is not very good news for us. So the source of U.S. Census Bureau 2004 projected, for example, 20 million people will probably have any kind of neurodegenerative disease. We have a mediumistic group in Brazil, and we have the courage to ask the spirits, why is it going to happen? What is the spiritual will of this tendency? For example, this is the U.S., for the U.S. population, the estimation. They expect that 20 million people will have neurodegenerative diseases. And this is the world dimension estimative for the future. For example, they expect for 2050 that more than 100 million people have at least one neurodegenerative diseases. And we ask the spirits, why is it going to happen? Why are we going to have this kind of experiences? And the answer is very clever. He said, the neurodegenerative diseases will stimulate self-transcendence, because once we have lots of health in our brain, in our lives, we are not motivated to spirituality. If we see the data, we see that older people become more interested in spirituality compared to young people. Maybe because they are healthy and they can have fun a lot with their bodies, and they are not interested in growing in a spiritual point of view. So these kind of neurodegenerative diseases may be a stimuli to self-transcendence and to think and to live in other mental and emotional dimensions. After all, from a spiritual point of view, it will be good for us, although we don't like diseases. So there is a growing opportunity to self-transcend ourselves, to evolve from exercises, whatever they are, of self-transcendence, meditation, prayer, and so on. And I would like to finish with just a message from a book called Thought and Life by Emmanuel, which is a spiritual guide of Chico Xavier, which was a spiritual guide of Chico Xavier, published in 1958, that says, to pray is to identify the self with a greater source of power of the universe, absorbing their reserves and living the laws of permanent renewal that govern the foundations of life.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book And Life Goes On by the Spirit André Luis, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
The Spiritist magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, this show is about medicine and spirituality. These are now the interviews and the excerpts of the talks from the speakers of the 3rd Medical Spiritist meeting in London this year. Listen to this, enjoy and rejoice.
We are here with Dr. Prada at the third British Medical Spiritist meeting, and she gave a talk about the importance of the cytoplasm in our health from a medical spiritist perspective. Dr. Prada, would you please bring us the major highlights about this talk? I am grateful with the opportunity. Andrew Lewis, in his book Evolution in Two Worlds, which first edition happened in 1958, stated that thought acts in the cellular cytoplasm. At the time, we found this information somewhat odd, because science had revealed that the nucleus was the bearer of the genetic code. So we would ask ourselves, how would thought, a noble function of conscience, act onto the cytoplasm and not in the nucleus of the cell? But since the 90s, science itself revealed that our thought and feeling act upon the cellular cytoplasm. There are several models to explain that such happens, as the ones by Hameroff, Penrose, Daszynski, Pribram. They try to demonstrate that cytoplasmic structures such as the microtubules are responsible for the connection from the thinking to the neural networks. Thus, nowadays science has revealed that it is in the cytoplasm the influence of our thoughts, particularly the microtubules, which from the centrioles that in turn are responsible for the cellular reproduction. These and others in the cytoplasm are the ones that act onto the nucleus of the cell. Thus, the role of the genes in our lives are totally indirect. Actually, our thoughts are the commanders of our lives through the cytoplasm, and much more than that, our emotions. Scientists already have compelling evidence that our emotions have like an aura around the cognitive information. And this aura, as says Andrea Lewis, is the one that gives form and structure to the cognitive information. Thus, nowadays, thoughts and mainly emotions are responsible for the direction of our lives, not the destiny or our genetic code.
As you just heard from Dr. Prada, emotions are an integral part of ourselves. And this is what we actually were asked to talk about in this third Medical Spiritist meeting in London, Neuroscience of Emotions and Healing. And we began by talking the fact that since the cord, many people still believe that emotions are private events in our lives. And they are not actually private events. They are so unified in our lives that it's quite hard for somebody to say that what they are feeling doesn't belong to what they are doing or they are saying or they are speaking or they are thinking. Darwin himself published in The Origin of Species, which is turning 200 years, emotions are adaptive. They are so vital and important. And recently, Dr. Antonio Damasio, the leading neuroscientist of emotions, he talks about how emotions are an integral part of our reasoning. They are actually a multidimensional phenomenon. So much so that we need to focus on what we're doing to our emotional intelligence. So in this talk, we talked about the definition of emotional intelligence, a little bit on the neurocircuitry of our emotions, and then we bridge it to medicine, talking about the scientific findings, reporting how our emotions get in sync with the emotions of our patients and vice versa. These are reports since 2007 in the Journal of Nervous Mental Disorder, when it was published about the physiological correlate between therapist and patient through raw skin conductivity. And in that regard, when we think about emotions, we're talking about things that people are not fully aware. We would dare to say that we're living in an era in which people are somehow illiterate about emotions. People barely know how to define what they're feeling, and not even to mention about to elaborate on their emotions. So we're living in an era of a much needed emotional literacy. No wonder we recall in our talk the passage in which Emmanuel talks to Chico Xavier about discipline at all different levels. And then at the final part of our talk, we marched onto the highlights of the book Evolution in Two Worlds, in which the spirit doctor Andrea Lewis, in a visionary way, brings to us the understanding of emotions as an integral part of us, building our aura as the foyer of our souls. As he says, the entrance hall of our souls. The climax of our talks is about the physiology of altruism. The best emotions of all, in a Christ-conscious manner, let's say this way, is to feel altruistic. And this is when we are actually going to enhance our emotional abilities to the highest level of emotion. This is basically what we talked about. Now we're going to leave you with the understanding of Dr. Fenwick about consciousness and how we achieve this highest level of illumination. Listen to his quite compelling and amazing excerpts of his talk and enjoy the other ones as well.
The world is changing, and with it our understanding of individual consciousness. I was talking about science. One of the things that science seems to be pointing to at the moment is that consciousness, the awareness that you're doing an action, for example, or feeling a sensation, particularly doing an action, arises too late. You can show that it's there for several seconds before it comes into consciousness. So the argument, or one argument, is that we're all automatons. But the other point about it is this, that you can say, okay, well, maybe it doesn't come into consciousness before we do an action, but it does come into consciousness just before the action, so we have free won't. So instead of having free will, we can stop it. Now, in actual fact, that's been shown to be untrue too, because the stopping comes into consciousness too late to stop an action. So science is suggesting then that it is brain processes essentially which control us. And I want to look now at what the influences are that we all have in our common culture. And much of this change is driven by computing power, which is still expanding. But now the interesting point comes is, can we change our neurophysiology so that we can see the divine and experience bare awareness? Well, yes, because there have always been methods for changing your physiology, but not codified. Zen says that you can by training attention. So they're all attentional techniques. So we need to look at that. How do you do it? Well, you can go back to the old methods. Ouspensky, a philosopher who was in London, has his movements. The meditation, mindfulness, or dervish turning. These are all attentional training techniques. But what effect on the brain does meditation have? Is brain size different with meditation? In other words, are you producing different brains in meditators? And does number of years meditating affect brain size? Well, it's a very nice paper by Britta, and that was an investigation of mindfulness meditation looking at brain size. It's a very small study, but it's something which is on the way. What they showed is that there were three specific areas which increased in size when you did mindfulness meditation. The first one is the left inferior temporal gyrus. The second one is the right anterior insula. And the third one is, in fact, the right hippocampus. So those are the three brain areas which change in size, and they all have specific functions attached to them. And in fact, the authors said the temporal lobes have been implicated in religious activity and mystical experiences, which is true, which are characterized by the feelings of deep pleasure and the experience of insight into the unity of all reality. Similar experiences reported by meditators during deep stages of meditation and might be related to the structural differences. So the argument is that this is a very good method for changing brain size, but it's also on the direct path of attentional techniques and experiencing those sorts of mental states that you find in the fifth sheath.
My name is Franziska Kranz from Kardec Radio. We're here live at the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. What's your name, please?
Deborah Fish.
Hello, Deborah. Thanks for joining us. What is your impression of the Congress?
I've been most impressed by it. My background is that I work as a psychotherapist. I worked in the NHS for a while. I worked in Canada at universities doing providing psychotherapy to students. and I've really been impressed by the caliber of speech that they've had, and it's been extremely interesting. I had no idea that in Brazil they were so advanced in integrating spirituality into clinical practice. So it's been really exciting to hear what they've got to share.
And what kind of knowledge impressed you most? Is there something you take home maybe to your practice, or?
I think it's just an awareness of how differently it's done in different places, and that they're taking things to a kind of empirical level in other countries that could well benefit us in the UK. I think I've probably been most struck by the professionalism of this Congress as well. The speakers have been extremely accomplished in their field, very knowledgeable, and I hadn't known much about what to expect before I came, and so it's been a delight to be here.
Thank you very much.
I'm Luis Grasso of Cardiac Radio. So we are here directly from the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. Would you like to please say your name, what you do, and what your impressions on our Congress? And okay.
Yes, I'm Dr. David MacDonald. I'm a psychiatrist. Been working in NHS in England for about 40 years. Very interested in spirituality and mental health for many years, and I'm absolutely amazed at the amount of knowledge and experience that's coming out of Brazil being shared here today that goes back over many years of hard work and fantastic innovative discoveries by very spiritual people in Brazil, the mediums, and I think this is contributing enormously to our understanding of mental health and interpersonal health needs of our society. And I hope that this scientific information gets through to a wider and wider audience throughout the world. What is fascinating is the communication that is possible from the other side of death or life, really, whichever way you want to look at it. And that what we've always believed and known at some level is being validated by people in a rigorous and scientific way, which is great development. Very impressive conference.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your contribution to our program. Thank you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
On December 6th, Strand Releasing proudly releases on DVD the Brazilian blockbuster Astral City, A Spiritual Journey. Based on the best-selling book by medium Chico Xavier, the film tells the story of André Luiz, a successful doctor who experiences an enlightening spiritual awakening after his death. Buy your copy now. Contact us at www.strandreleasing.com.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Participate on the first Spiritist Seminar of Chicago. On November 19th and 20th, the Spiritist Society of Chicago will be organizing and hosting the first Spiritist Seminar of Chicago. Their theme is Spiritual Awareness for a Better Life, with speakers from Brazil, Raul Teixeira and Alírio Cerqueira.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the Spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
So, Dr. Almeida, we are very grateful that you're here with us today at Kardec Radio, and we'd like to get a brief overview about the two topics you've discussed in the British Medical Spiritist Congress yesterday and today. Would you please?
Yes, it's been my pleasure. Today we discussed about the differential diagnosis between spiritual experience and mental disorder. Basically, we start showing that there is a lot of data showing that the prevalence of anomalous experience, like hearing things, seeing things, are very widespread in the general population. There is a very recent study, including 52 countries around the world, showing that the prevalence of this experience in the last year was about 12% in the whole population. But what was more interesting was that only 10% of these people having some kind of anomalous experience actually have some psychotic disorder. So 90% of people having this anomalous experience actually do not have a psychotic disorder. And there are a lot of data also showing that very often some anomalous experience associated with spiritual experiences are actually related to better mental health and better social adjustment. And finally, we propose some guidelines that could help us in making this differentiation between an experience that indicates a mental disorder and an experience that indicates normal spiritual experience. And usually the major point is if the person has this anomalous experience, but at the same time the person is working well, has good relationships with his family or her family, with the neighbors in the work, if the person can keep working, if the person do not show other evidence of mental disorder, like social inhibition, like cognitive disturbance, and things like that. So the summary is that we just cannot think or label someone as having a mental disorder or psychotic disorder just because the person has some anomalous experience. So it's very important to make this differentiation, to provide people support, counseling regarding that.
We have one more question regarding a study that you presented in the U.S., and we often mention it. 5 years ago, you talked about that study on Spiritist mediums and the quality of their mental health. Can you just give us an overview, because many people have been asking us about that?
Okay, so we performed a study with 115 Brazilian mediums working in Spiritist centers in São Paulo, and the overview basically is these mediums had high levels of what is usually called psychotic experience or anomalous experience, like seeing things, hearing things, feeling influence in his or her body from an outside source. And so despite having this high level of anomalous experience, these people had actually very good levels of social adjustment and a lower level of mental disorder. Actually, there was an association between having high levels of full trance experience and better levels of social adjustment and lower levels of depressive and anxiety symptoms.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you soon in the U.S. Thank you.
Now listen to excerpts of the talk of this speaker and enjoy it.
We will discuss evidence available in the scientific literature regarding the prevalence of spiritual and anomalous experience in the general population, the association of this experience or with mental health or mental disorder, and how could we make differential diagnosis between both. Anomalous experience could be defined as some kind of experience that is believed to deviate from ordinary experience or from conventionally accepted explanations of reality. So claims of things like telepathy or clairvoyance or spiritual communications, all these kinds of experience could be called as anomalous experience. Several authors have proposed to use this term to call this kind of experience. And spiritual experience specifically are usually some kind of anomalous experience related to the transcendent. Some kind of experience that in some sense people feel that are in touch with some non-material reality, with some transcendental reality. And also there is another term very used in the psychiatric and medical literature, that is the psychotic experience. Psychotic experience could be hallucinations, like seeing things, hearing things, thought insertion, the experience that someone had some thoughts inserted in his or her own mind, and experience of passivity, having the feeling that the body is controlled by some outside source. But it has been growing increasingly recognized that this psychotic experience are not necessarily a symptom of a mental disorder. It could be some kind of non-pathological experience. And then some authors have proposed that when a psychotic experience is related actually to a psychotic disorder, then it should be labeled as psychotic symptoms. Okay? There are a lot of debates about that, but I just present these definitions because they are very often used in the psychiatric and psychological literature, and I will also refer to some of them throughout my presentation. So just to present you one study that we have performed. We made a random selection of 9 Spiritist centers in São Paulo, Brazil. In these centers, we investigated 115 mediums who were working in these centers. Just to provide you an idea, these mediums in Brazil, especially in Spiritism, mediumship is not a job. People have their regular jobs and they work as mediums for charity, for free, in their free time. Okay? So these people have their regular lives and they also act and contribute as mediums in their Spiritist centers. As we can see here, we have a sample with high educational level, low unemployment rate, what seems to show some kind of good social adjustment. Good signals of good social adjustment in a sample with high levels of anomalous experience. So we investigated the types of mediumship that they had. Incorporation is a kind of full trance. Cacophony is a kind of speaking mediumship. The mediums feel that their speech is controlled by an outside source, by a spirit. They could have the seeing, hearing, and psychography, automatic writing. As you can see, these experiences were very common among these mediums, and on average, the mediums had, on average, 3 kinds of mediumship, each medium. And here you can see the frequency of this experience. For example, incorporation was about 8 times a month. They had experience of possession, incorporation, full trance about 8 times a month, just to give you an idea. And what was the mental health profile of this sample, since they have high levels of this anomalous experience? We used the SRQ, that is a very common and widely used a psychiatric screening questionnaire developed by World Health Organization. So the prevalence of people who were above the cutoff point for common mental disorders at SRQ was about 10.5%. The SRQ screened for common mental disorders like depression, anxiety, psychosomatic disorders. And in the Brazilian data from the Brazilian general population using the same scale showed a prevalence of people above the cutoff for mental disorders between 18 to 35%. So in this sample, there was lower level of people with common mental disorders than in the general population. And a very interesting and unexpected finding was that there was a negative correlation between the frequency of incorporation and the score at SRQ. That means that the higher the frequency of incorporation, the lower the number of psychiatric symptoms. We also used another scale to investigate mental health. But in this time, we did not use a scale of symptoms, of psychiatric symptoms. We used a scale of social adjustment. Exactly because it's not based on symptoms, it is based on the social adjustment in the job, in the work, in home, with friends, with the neighbors, and things like that. This is also widely used and well-validated scale. We also used a validated version, a Portuguese version. And this scale ranges from 1 to 5. The lower, the better the social adjustment. Okay? So the average score was 1.85. That was a score on average lower than, for example, samples with depression and things like that. So basically, the finding of social adjustment in our sample was in line with what is expected in the general population. And repeating in some sense the previous finding, there was also an association between higher levels of some mediumistic experiences like hearing and incorporation and better levels of social adjustment. So it has become clear that it's not just because some authors think that psychotic symptoms are in a continuum in the general population. Some people can have lower levels of psychotic symptoms, but the higher the level of psychotic symptoms, the more disabled you are and more closer to a psychotic disorder you are. These findings do not fit with this idea because we have people with high levels of anomalous experience but with good social adjustment. And in the opposite, people having higher levels of anomalous experience have been associated with better levels of social adjustment and lower levels of other psychiatric symptoms. We also did a comparison between the data of our sample and the data available in literature with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, another label for the same thing. So basically, we analyzed here some of the features that are very common in multiple personality disorder patients. And as you can see, actually the mediums had a very different profile from patients with multiple personality disorder. So it seems that actually these are two different things. So the conclusion that we can reach based on this study is that about 90% of psychotic experience are not actually related to psychotic disorders. So it would be better to relabel this experience as anomalous experience or anything else.
I'm Luis Grasso from Cardiac Radio. We are here now, directly from the 3rd British Congress of Medicine and Spirituality. What I would like to ask you, what's your name, what do you do, and what have been your impressions?
My name is Solomon Waters. At the moment I'm writing. I'm trained as a hypnotherapist. I'm writing 3 novels and a screenplay at the moment. Today was a fantastic day with a lot of wonderful talks, very intelligent, very interesting, and particularly interested in the aspect of how medicine is evolving. I was very interested in the last speaker from America who was really talking about emotional intelligence and the importance of really connecting with somebody, whether that's somebody you're seeing who's a patient, a client, or just generally as a presenter, in all walks of life, how important it is to really connect emotionally, to have respect or show consideration and kindness, and even to connect on a soul level with someone brings such a different response and such a positive experience.
Thank you very much for participating in our program. Thank you.
I'm Franziska Kranz from Cardiac Radio, and we are here live at the 3rd British Congress on Medicine and Spirituality. What's your name, please?
Tanya.
Hello, Tanya. Thanks for joining us. So what is your general impression of the Congress?
Very, very grateful. It's been at times a very moving experience, moving from the head into the heart. Very grateful to have access to such a diversity of high-quality speakers and researchers across the medical spectrum, and a wonderful atmosphere, extremely well organized, and very grateful to have access to the innovations that these practitioners are putting into their practices, and to have access to the latest research.
And what is the thing you liked most about the Congress?
I think I liked the recurring themes that through the science of the head is the science inverted commas of the heart. Every speaker effectively at some point referring back to the need for love and compassion, for not just for true healing, but for the development of us as spirits.
Okay, thank you very much.
We are here with Dr. Giancarlo Lucchetti from Brazil, and he has just given a talk on Spiritist psychiatric hospitals, which was quite interesting, and would like to ask you to summarize the main highlights of your talk, please.
Okay, first, thank you for being here. In fact, I show the results of a survey we did regarding the Spiritist psychiatric hospitals in Brazil. We evaluated 6 Spiritist psychiatric hospitals, its working structure, the spiritual practices available for the patients, and we found such interesting results
that our hospitals in Brazil are responsible for 50% of psychiatry beds in the state of São Paulo, for instance, and the most common spiritual practices offered for the patients were hands in position and magnetized water, this obsession that is the spirit release therapy, and lectures regarding Jesus' teachings. And these hospitals are trying now to put into a scientific way to showing their results to the scientific community, and we think it's very important to share our results with the community.
Just quickly, Dr. Luchetti, would you say that we don't have scientific evidence that some form of the Spiritist approach into the psychiatric hospitals expedite the healing of these patients?
In fact, we have a clinical trial showing promising results regarding the disobsession, that's spirit release therapy. It's published in Revista de Psiquiatria Clínica by an author called Frederico Leão. He found that better behavioral outcomes and better clinical outcomes also. Of course, there are lots of case reports showing evidence, but we are trying now to compilate all this evidence in a future study. Maybe it will be published in 2012.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now listen to excerpts of the talk of this speaker and enjoy it.
Today I'm going to speak about the Spiritist psychiatric hospitals in Brazil, the integration of conventional psychiatric treatment and spiritual complementary therapy. That's an article that was accepted at the journal Culture, Medicine and Psychiatry. It will be published on March 2012. This journal is indexed in Web of Science and Medline. We are very happy with the results of this study. This study is a collaboration between João Evangelista Hospital, the São Paulo Medical Spiritist Association, Lutheran University of Brazil, Federal University of Juiz de Fora, and the University of São Paulo. So I will show you the spiritual treatments available in each hospital. Fluidotherapy, 100%, all hospitals have this kind of therapy. Lectures, studies regarding spiritism, all hospitals have this kind of therapy. Disobsession, spirit release therapy, all hospitals have this kind of therapy. Prayer, irradiation, all hospitals. Fraternal care, also all hospitals. And ecumenic lectures regarding all religious affiliations, a half of these hospitals have this kind of treatment. So I will briefly discuss each therapy provided. For instance, fluidotherapy, that's the laying on of hands, we call Spiritist passe, and magnetized water, we call fluidic water. According to Spiritism, the fluidotherapy is the transmission of a biospiritual energy from the healer to the patient. It's also known as passe. I will provide for you some scientific evidences, and I will invite all of you to see this article here that was published recently in 2011. It's a work from the São Paulo Medical Spiritist Association showing the evidence regarding the complementary spiritist therapy. So it's a systematic review showing the studies that give evidence or not from these therapies. So, although this is a procedure, a religious procedure in this case, it's similar. It's some kind of similar of the therapeutic touch performed by nurses and used throughout psychiatric institutions and for psychiatric patients. For a further discussion, I would recommend this article here. Well, the disobsession spirit release therapy, it's mediumship meetings where the mediums, so persons who claim to have contact with the spiritual worlds by many means, vision, hearing, intuition, they are in trance and allow the communication of an obsessing spirit who is believed to be causing harm to the patient. So it's some kind of psychotherapy with the spirit, trying to give up, to make the obsessor or the spirit to give up the patient.
So there are very interesting case reports indicating a remission of psychiatric conditions. And there is a clinical trial that I showed earlier that showed a promising result. Of course, it's a pilot study, but it's very promising. And in conclusion, you can see here that Brazilian Spiritist psychiatric hospitals bring an integrative concept for the treatment of psychiatric disorders, combining the conventional psychiatric therapies, and we strongly believe that it's very important, the drug therapy, the conventional therapy, but we believe that complementary therapies such as spiritual therapies are also very important for the patient. We believe that the biological is very important, but also the psychological, the social, the ecological, and of course the spiritual therapies are very important. The lack of standardized treatment and scientific research are still an impediment to assess the impact of this integrative approach over patients' mental health, quality of life, adhesion, and perceived quality of life for these treatments. But, as I told earlier, we are trying to change the scenario, and we believe we can show that there is strong evidence from these kinds of therapies, and we are working very hard to show, to demonstrate the evidence regarding these therapies.
Thank you, Dr. Paris, for being here with us at Kardec Radio, and we know we are going to give very special talk about anxiety and depression and mood disorders, and we'd like to know the highlights of your talk to share with our audience, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you as well. And my talk is going to be about the spirituality and its relation with depression and anxiety disorders. We're going to focus mainly on the impact of those disorders, spirituality, religion, religious aspects, behaviors, and many studies, many scientific papers have been published on the issue. In general, we can say religiosity and spirituality is protective against depression and anxiety disorders. People recover from depression faster than non-religious people. And of course, we're not going to talk about that, but it's important to emphasize that in terms of drug abuse and alcohol, all the drugs, also we have an important effect in terms of, again, protection for those disorders. One thing that we like to say in those talks is the mechanism behind it, and trying to give some explanation of how much spirituality will give a better idea of the process being suffered by the patients. And one thing is, when you think about your day-to-day basis, your way to perceive things, the human brain is absolutely living in this particular second. So we are living in this second, and we're going and going after one second after another. So everything we see, we hear, we feel is in this particular time. And it's important to know that when the brain perceives, when we think of thing that occurred, or when we project the future, both when we think about the past as opposed to when we think about the future, whatever we think about, we're living that mental idea, that mental schema. So if we think of a very disturbed thing, if we remember a trauma, or if we re-experience a bad feeling, or if we remember something bad, then we're gonna live again that sort of feeling in that scenario again. And when we think of it, when we worry about the future and we think that something bad is going to occur, in the same way we are experiencing that that same issue, and the brain and the whole body is responding to that. So spirituality gives a broader context for that aspect, and we can, after thinking about this idea, we can try to decrease the expectations, the negative expectations, and build up positive expectations. And we can also put the suffering previously experienced in a broader context and try to overcome more easily the trauma or the negative aspect experienced in the past. So that's pretty much the abstract of what we're talking about.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Perry,
you.
very much.
Thank you.
We hope to have you back here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, dear listener, in this medical spiritist meeting, we had a lot to learn. A lot to learn about the combination of heart and reasoning. It's about the transdimensionality of ourselves and talking about it. Some of the things we discussed the most is about this temporary nature of our reincarnation. Sooner or later, we're going to be asked to be crossing over. And some of the studies that Dr. Norbury, Dr. Fenwick, Dr. Fowler, many others of the researchers reporting in this meeting said, even at the moment of death, we need to be very conscientious. So here is to wrap up this show in a most altruistic and charitable note. Let us exercise this thinking of others and learn how to pray for somebody who is dying. Allan Kardec, in the Gospel According to Spiritism, chapter 29, he put together an explanation on why we should pray for people when they're dying. If you think the last moments of life are just a waste, think twice, because they are so vital. They are very important. They can be crucial to the spirit that is going away, and also to the ones who are connected to him or her. So as Kardec says, prayer can exert a powerful action on the effort of the separation between body and soul. So let us now pray for all those who are at this moment dying. And if you have someone who is crossing over, remember, life does not end here, and it continues. So prayer can be very helpful in this transition. Let us pray now. Almighty and merciful God, this is a soul who is about to leave its earthly body behind to return to the spirit world, its true homeland. May this soul enter in peace, and may your mercy be extended over this soul. Good spirits who have followed this soul while on the earth, do not forsake this soul at the supreme moment. Give it strength to endure the final suffering it must experience in this world for its future advancement. Inspire it, so that it may consecrate to the repentance of its wrongs the final glimmerings of intelligence or any flitting thoughts that may still come to mind, and guide our thoughts so that our actions may render the efforts of separation less painful, taking to the soul consolations and hope at the moment of leaving this earth. Dear listener, this is Kardec Radio, nourishing your soul, nourishing all of our souls. We'd like to remind you that in a week we're going to come back to talk about professional and spiritual tools for immigrants. As you know, being an immigrant is not easy. It encompasses a lot of transformations, a lot of changes, and Kardec Radio is here to nourish your soul, to empower you to live better. So come back next week. We're going to have the honor to have with us Dr. Nara Venditti and ourselves to talk about how you can live a better life being an immigrant anywhere in this world. After all, we're all immigrants because our souls have lived so many places, and we're born and reborn here and there and everywhere else. So may God bless us all.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.